This is the Big Lap Chats podcast, where our mission is to help caravanners and campers plan their ultimate lap of Australia. Whether you're dreaming of hitting the road or already travelling, we provide all the information and tools you'll need to bring your dream to life. Tune in as our expert host Annette Jones chats with Australia's big lappers, caravanners and campers, sharing hints and tips for creating the best memories while travelling around Australia. Be sure to check out Annette's website, All Around Oz, Australia's leading site for planning a lap of Australia. But now, settle in and hit play while you're on the road and listen as Annette delivers today's episode.
Welcome back to another episode of Big Lap Chats, and this week's episode is going to take a little bit of a different turn. We're going to look at caravan weights and the importance of knowing your weights of both your rig and your van. And today, to help us understand that, we've got Brennan Raymakers here from Know My Tow. Welcome, Brennan. It's great to have you here.
Thanks, Annette. Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome. So for someone brand new to caravanning, what do they actually need to know about weights and why is it such a big deal?
Yeah, great question. Look, weights are one of those things where it seems simple at the start, and I think it's changed over the years. And I think we're in a stage where travelling Australia and doing laps with vans for extended periods has meant a change in the culture and as well as the market with vans that are fitted out now to be off-road. They're more homely in terms of they've got almost sort of full kitchens and the way we do bathrooms and stuff like that. So weights have become, I think, an increasing factor when towing. One of the points of contention around this is that tow capacity, which is relatively straightforward, is just one thing to consider. And understanding the other things is where it can get a little bit muddy or murky, especially around matching a vehicle to tow something safely. And when looking into this, there's a few things that you have to gather together. Obviously, one is matching that your vehicle can tow your van, so that the tow capacity of your car. But then there is other specifications such as tow ball download, as your gross vehicle mass of your car, so how much payload you put on your car, and as well as axle loads, which aren't quite as straightforward as just matching a tow capacity of your car to a van, especially because you can know what the weight of your van is essentially by reading the VIN plate or what the rating is for the overall weight. To do it for payload and to do it for axle loads and to do it for even your tow ball download can be something a little bit more complicated, especially because it changes based on how much weight you then have in your car or your van. So
it's quite complex, really, when you start digging into it, isn't it?
It is. It can get complex. And I think the thing is as well is that, like they say with insurance, if you are overweight, it is uninsurable and it's illegal to be overweight. Yet sometimes to figure out whether you're or not is quite difficult because you first have to understand the different specifications that you need to check for. Secondly, you then have to go find them if you don't have them. And then third, you have to, in terms of balancing, okay, am I over or under? And sometimes that more than just weighing your caravan, it's actually in matching to see whether because you can be within your tow capacity, but over, for example, for your tow ball download or your rear axle loads.
Yeah.
So there's a bit to it, which kind of you start the journey.
Can we bust this myth right now, or can you confirm it's true? Because I see it, I've got a couple of Facebook groups and I see questions all the time about it or statements about if you're overweight and you have an accident, your insurance is void. Is that a blanket statement or is it only particular insurance companies or how does that work?
Look, it's a very interesting one and I can't really answer on behalf of insurance companies. I think the issue would be more around how much you're overweight. So typically it would be between, I think, and I've recently actually had this conversation because I've just insured my van that I'm building one at home. So I've just managed to get it on the road and do insurance. And something through that is that they never tell you whether what you're towing it with. So they don't really know whether it's legal or not. And I don't know if you've had that same scenario, but I've never been asked, what are you towing the van with that you're insuring? And so out of curiosity, I asked the question, and I won't say who I was calling up. I did call a few different ones out of curiosity.
No.
And the answer was that would then likely have to be under your vehicle's insurance, not the caravan insurance. But I doubt that the vehicle insurance would take liability if they also knew that. So I think it comes down to a question of potentially were you trying to do the right thing or whether you were overweight. And obviously you can be almost on the line where you're within spec but almost over spec. And then there's this sort of classic stupidity, right, where you're doing something illegal and dangerous. I do know that it is an offence. You can go to court or even jail, and that has happened with being overweight, especially if you have an accident and let's say someone gets terribly injured or even dies. That's taken pretty seriously. Yeah.
If there's an accident, then do they just estimate, or do they actually collect every part of the caravan and its contents to actually weigh
It's a good question.
How does that work?
It's a great question. Look, I don't think they would. I think they would investigate to a degree to understand what the setup was like. I don't think they would replicate to understand exactly how you had that setup itself. That would be quite a difficult thing to do. But I certainly do think they will check the main specifications, right? If you are towing something that has a tow capacity under that which your van weighs, that certainly could be a problem. That's for sure. And signs of stress on the vehicle and things like that will also show. But it is definitely an up-and-coming discussion, I think, amongst caravanners and the like, because it's come out that we hear this, it's uninsurable, which they'll state, it's illegal and all these other things, but then at the same time, it's not like it's straightforward for you to know that. There's a big sort of learning curve that needs to occur, and even if you want to do the right thing, just out of misunderstanding, even if you've been told by, let's say, a caravan dealer or even a car dealer that this may be legal, it may in fact actually not be legal because they might not know your exact setup at the time that you're travelling.
And they certainly wouldn't know the weights of your rig either. So
exactly,
depending on what you've upgraded to or mods and so forth.
Yeah, exactly.
So then how do people understand the difference between, I mean, I've got a blog post on this and I'll link to it in the show notes. But what's the difference between GVMs and ATMs and GTMs and GCMs and ball weights, tar weights?
Yeah.
And do people really need to know them?
Yeah, great.
Which we've established they actually do.
Yeah. Good question. There's a lot there, isn't there? Look, essentially, you do need to know them. I think at least at a high level. You do have to make sure that you are within specifications at a high level, but there is a few things that you need to check, and then if you do check them, you will be okay. But essentially, the big ones really are, and obviously tow capacity is a pretty obvious one. Your GCM, so your gross combined mass, that's essentially the total weight of the car and the caravan hitched. So essentially, it's your car's limit to tow something hitched on the car, so it's your total weight. Your GVM is essentially your curb weight plus your max payload. So let's say you're 2,500 kilos sitting on the curb, meaning that you're ready to go, but nobody's in the car and without luggage or anything like that, but you've got a full tank of fuel, that sort of thing. It's then that plus the payload rating of your car. And payload is defined as the amount of weight you're allowed to put in your car, a bit like when you fly, it's how much luggage you're allowed to bring on the flight itself. And then you've got your caravan weight. So you've got GTM, which is your gross train mass. You've then got, your gross trailer mass. Your ATM is your aggregate trailer mass. And your ATM is essentially your total weight. So that's really what you should be looking at to check whether you can tow this vehicle or not. And that should be under your tow capacity of your vehicle. So that's the key one. And say that there's a lot of the limitations really sit within the vehicle, not as much as the caravan. It's just getting that balance correct, I think. That's a big part to it. And then you do have things like axle loads, which are certainly a big discussion point as well. And the reason for that is because all the extra things that you have on your vehicle influence that. Things like whether you've got a bull bar, whether you've got a canopy, roof racks, all sorts of stuff. They obviously add weight to the car that is coming, but even though you've got nothing in it, no luggage in it, no people in it yet, your payload will be reduced by whatever accessories you've put on your vehicle. And that can be quite a big one. And I think the other key to understand as well is that your towable download, which is essentially the weight of the nose of your caravan, so where you would hitch to a car, whatever that figure is, that also comes off your payload. And that can be quite a big one. And I think as well because we underestimate how much weight we put in a vehicle or even a caravan, and it's amazing how quickly things add up. Yeah.
That's for sure.
It is incredible how quickly things can be overweight, even with some of the makes and models out there that are really class leading in terms of their ability to tow.
Any one model springs to mind for you when you say that?
Look, and you could start quite a few debates on this. Obviously, I think a big key one for me is really, and I think a sort of line I draw in the sand is vehicles where their GCM supports their max tow capacity and their max payload, I think is crucial because quite a few vehicles do not, which means that if you tow at your max tow capacity and you abide by your max payload, for the vehicles that have a GCM that don't add up to those, it means that you will be overweight with your GCM, even though you have followed the specifications for tow capacity and payload. I think that's quite crucial. And sometimes finding GCM isn't easy either. It can be quite tricky. And that's really what we set out to do, was to simplify really everything as much as possible so that we supply all that information. You don't have to do the maths, and you just tell us what car do you have and how much would you like to tow, and essentially give you a report on where you're sitting.
It's great. What's the most common mistake that you see people make when it comes to towing weights, and what could that cost them?
Yeah, look, it's an interesting one. I think, and I'm trying to think back to the report, because obviously we get a lot of information in terms of towing setup and what people put in. And I think one of the big ones is certainly payload. I think forgetting that the towable caravan comes off your car's payload. I think that's a massive one, especially if you've got a family. Or a lot of people, like an adult can weigh between sort of 70 and 100 kilos. If you've got sort of two adults, I've got 3 kids, so we have a lot of stuff. We've got prams and nappies, we bring the dog, so all that sort of stuff adds up.
Yeah.
We've got like a Land Cruiser, for example, depending on what will be around sort of 450 kilos of payload, and they can tow 3.5 tons. So let's say weighs maybe 2.5 tons, which means rough 10%, 250 kilo towable download. You would then take 2 for your payload of your Land Cruiser. So you're already 6 kilos with the caravan mounted, and that's also assuming no accessories. It's stock. So if you have a bull bar, that comes off. If you've got roof racks, that comes off. People have fridge setups and all sorts of stuff. You might be sitting at 250 kilos before you've put your family in. And 250 kilos is not that much weight. It sounds like it is. It's deducted quite quickly. Yeah.
That answers my next question, actually. Does adding gear, water or passengers affect weights? And how do I account for that when calculating my towing setup? But you've answered that.
Yeah.
So. That's
yes.
cool.
Yeah. Look. Yeah.
In conjunction with all that information, how does the Know My Tow calculator work? And what makes it better than just guessing or asking in Facebook groups?
Yeah, great question. And maybe I'll start from the reason we built it, is because I myself, the problems and the questions that I've stumbled across online when trying to figure out different things. And it's one of those things where you can go very deep into forums and debates on Facebook or whatever it is. And you've got opinions left and centre. And when I was trying to figure out a particular situation in which I actually had a van that I purchased, couldn't yet tow it, and I was looking at potential towing vehicles for it, I just got really frustrated that I just needed a solution where I could tell you what car I'm towing with and what I want to tow. And that's it. I just want you to tell me. Because it seems like you'd find an answer and then there'd be left of that. And then there'd be something else. Know My Tow really was built to demystify that or simplify it as much as possible. And we've done that by essentially having as many car vehicle specifications as possible. And that is a tricky thing to be probably our biggest hurdle. But essentially, you can select a vehicle. It then is inbuilt with all the specifications, so we would know your gross combined mass, we know your payload, your curb weights, all that sort of stuff. And then after selecting your vehicle, you just put in roughly what your payload would be, and you tell us how much you want to tow, and we'll give you an estimate. We also have where you can also use a weigh bridge, so if you want exact weights, you can go and weigh your rig or your setup like a Go Weigh or something similar, and then you can also enter that into a calculator if you want exact weights based on an actual weigh. But essentially, it's not bulletproof, but it's a starting point. It's to give you an idea of I am over, I would be over, or where am I sitting? It starts the conversations and tries to answer as best as possible.
Yeah. And I think the difference is, to start that again, and I think the difference is because I know I had a towing weight calculator built for my website, and one thing that was missing was the axle weights, which you've highlighted how important that is. And that is why we now have Know My Tow on the website. It's more comprehensive than the calculator that I had there. And the first tier of the actual calculator is free, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. So we've got sort of two main versions. So we have a free version which allows you to use a calculator, select your vehicle, put in your setup with limited results. So it gives you basically a ticker across to say your setup is within spec or not within spec, but it doesn't give you the value. So you may not know where exactly you're sitting.
Details.
Yeah, but it shows you are okay or you're not okay. And then the premium version essentially gives you all the information that we have. So it tells you all the exact limits. So you'll get your gross combined mass figures. It'll tell you how much you're over, how much you're under, and you'll also get a report with that with a sort of full comprehensive breakdown along with gauges. So we also have things like vehicle to trailer weight rating. So, your percent weight of your vehicle to your caravan or trailer or whatever it might be, as well as a breakdown of something else. So you can get an idea of, I am over, but you might be over by, let's say, 50 kilograms. You might not know that in the free version. In the detailed one, you can know that. And that could simply mean on your setup and then you're okay again.
So if the caravan's overweight, what can people do to reduce the weight?
Yeah, look, a classic thing is, and it's very much true, that it depends on how you actually load your van as to the distribution of weight, especially around the towable download. So if that's a particular factor, it can sometimes be about shifting where essentially your payload or the weight you've put in your van, where you actually put it within the caravan itself. So if your towable download is over, as you'd assume, moving it back from the front of the van, so towards the rear of the van, is going to lighten your load. Now you want to be careful with that because you want the heavier stuff really on the axle, and then you want to balance it quite well. A classic example is if you are overweight in the front and you move things to the rear, anything in the rear counts for roughly twice off the front. For example, if you've put 20 kilograms now back onto the rear of the van, that can count for a 40 kilogram lift off the towable download. Now that doesn't take into consideration your length of your van, your rear overhang and things like that. But as a rough rule, moving things to the rear of the van will certainly lighten up what's on the front. So it's a matter of just getting that correctly. Manufactured vans really should abide by all sorts of things and have their actual design set up so that when you do load it, the places where you store your items should complement essentially the towing and the ride of the caravan. But that certainly is not always the case, that's for sure. And especially if you modify your van or you extend things or whatever it might be. Yeah, another thing is water as well. Sometimes water can be a fantastic state depending on your van as well. And that may be something that if you are really close to your specifications, it's something that you can play with. So it may mean that you can't take as much water, for example, to lighten the load. But at that point, it's a close limit to potentially being overweight. And if that's the case, then, you probably at some point are going to be overweight. Unless you're weighing your rig every single time you set up, it's probably gonna happen. Yes.
Yeah. Do you recommend that people have their rigs or the whole setups weighed more than once?
I don't think that's necessary. That's not going to do you any harm at all. But I am more for over-engineering the setup so that you do have essentially the ability to not have to worry or stress having things to the line. And that means, obviously, from the get-go, having your setup so that you do have capacity within your vehicle to manage your caravan, irrespective of what you might do with it, as long as you're within your caravan limits. Sometimes that's not always the case. A lot of these vans are quite heavy, and sometimes unless you want to go to an American Ute or something like that, you really can't get away with a lot that we have. If you're running a setup that's close to 3.5 ton van fully loaded, then potentially that would be a good idea, I think. Yeah, it's not best case. And as I said, it's amazing how quickly things can load up, even things like just clothing and just stuff that it's incredible. It really is, yeah, it really is amazing.
Yeah, soon adds up. Yeah, for sure. Interestingly, I've been reading about the new Ford
Mm.
Ranger Super Duty that's coming to Australia. What do you think about that? Are people going to think, oh, yeah, that's going to solve all my problems. I'll just go out and buy one of those.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, I think, and I don't have an opinion on it just yet because I don't quite understand yet what they'll do with it. It's a good idea. I do like it. I do have a concern, though, in terms of your vehicle to caravan weight. So essentially, even if you're within spec, but your caravan happens to weigh more than your vehicle, it has the ability then to pull you around a little bit. So, and you may have felt this at times, but if you are getting blown around on a highway and that van is heavier than your vehicle, it will move you around. And so I wonder, obviously based on the current Ranger, you were adding another ton worth of towing capacity. Does that then complement another ton worth of weight on your vehicle? Because essentially it means now you're towing things that have an extra 1,000 kilos possibly, but the car's weighing similar to what it did before. That would be and I don't know what the car will weigh just yet and what those details will be, but that would be, probably a key consideration for me, and whether the gross combined mass and these other factors actually support it quite well. And I think it's one thing to have a car that's possible to tow a certain weight, and it's another thing for it to be comfortable towing a certain weight. But I can't say until
because you don't.
And I get in one.
It's that whole scenario of the tail wagging the dog, isn't it? That's the last thing that you
exactly.
need.
Yeah, exactly right.
If someone's planning their big lap right now, what are the 3 things that they should check today and make sure that their setup is safe to tow?
Yeah, I think one that we don't often talk about enough, especially those that are experienced travellers would know all about this, but one is tyre pressure. So tyre pressure can make a really big difference when you're towing, and that both for your caravan, but very importantly for your vehicle, especially your rear tyre pressures. If they are lower, it just tows totally different. So I always think that's something to consider, especially if you're doing things like forward driving and stuff like that, where you might be actually changing a tyre pressure often. I think this understanding where or how you're loading your caravan, more importantly. So each time you reload it, even loading it quite differently can impact how it sits and how it feels on the road. I think that's something to be quite aware of. And then I also think another thing is, I'm trying to think of the third more important one. I do think water is the other one, especially around grey water. There's a lot of spots now where you have to have your grey water captured, and sometimes that's not something that's always built in, but water does weigh a lot very easily, and it disappears out of your mind thinking that you could easily have, if you've got a 120 litre grey water tank, that can fill up very quickly, especially if you are off-grid, as you would know. And that's another consideration, I think, because you may have to hold that for some time until you can dump it. So that's probably the other thing. I think they're probably there are probably 3 considerations I think that can easily slip past your mind, especially because you're always concentrated on everything else. Have I hooked up properly? Are the brakes on? My lights on? How does it all feel and everything else? It's quite a lot to actually to always keep thinking about, especially if you aren't doing the lap and you're going away on weekends or doing shorter trips. It doesn't become as much of a habit as something like those that are doing it all the time. It becomes second nature, I think.
What's one piece of advice that you wish every new lapper knew before hitching up for the first time?
I think it's that key piece about getting your setup correct. And I've heard, we often get different reviews of people emailing in, sometimes where they've bought literally a brand new van based on their car, then finding out it's not adequate enough and having to upgrade, which just blows out expenses. And it's frustrating because in some ways there's no one to often blame. And at the end of the day, you trust those that you think have authority to speak on the matter, and that can be often caravan dealers or whether it's car dealers. Yeah. There is a learning curve, and not everything's such a straight answer. So sometimes, yes, you can tow this. It really should be the answer that it's probably best not to. When you're making a sale, it doesn't matter to them. So I think probably not exactly. Yeah, exactly. So I think that's a key point, is just making sure your setup from the beginning is adequate enough. And the thing is, if you've got enough specification on your vehicle and you've thought it out that it's over-engineered, if anything, you'll always pretty much be okay. I think that would be a key thing when you consider it. And I know I've been down the route where you look at different vans and then you go, it'd be nice to have this, and the weight slowly creep up. And it goes, what's another 500 kilos on the van? That's just, it all matters.
It's quite a lot. Yeah, 100%. For sure.
So yeah, that would be, I think, my bit of advice, because it just means the whole caravanning, traveling experience is just so much lower stress and so much more enjoyable when it's like that.
Yeah, for sure. I know while we were waiting for our van to arrive, I was on a freeway in Brisbane. There was a caravan that was swaying all over the place, and I thought, oh, I couldn't imagine how that would feel driving that car at that speed. It'd be pretty scary. Like I was kind of concerned just driving behind it.
We've all, I've seen that as well myself, and I think sometimes there's no real checks or governing authority to. I'm not necessarily advocating that there should be one, but sometimes when you're wanting to start traveling and that sort of thing, you just get a van and you get a car and you tow it, and you don't know what should this feel like versus what it does feel like. So,
exactly. I think that comes with experience, doesn't it? And just chewing up the kilometres on all sorts of different roads before you get to know exactly how your rig and your van interacts on the road.
Yeah, definitely. And I think something that's always value added is to have a mobile weighing professional come and weigh your van or your setup or rig overall, because it just gives you an idea of where you are sitting and an extra piece of advice in terms of how to manage that. And I see my tow as a first step to the learning curve. So it's meant to help deliver essentially towing and demystify it so that you can understand, okay, this is where I may be sitting. But a mobile weighing professional post that sort of complements then, I think, that learning curve to understand exactly where you may be sitting, but what you can do about it, and maybe what your setup should be like and the do's and don'ts of that going forward.
That sounds really good. Thanks for that. That's about it from me. Is there anything else that caravanners need to know?
I will mention
that I've missed, I should say.
I will mention the...
I might just ask you that question again.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Did you want to ask that now?
Yeah, I'll ask that now. That's just about it from me. Is there anything I've missed that you feel that caravanners really need to know?
Yeah, look, I think aside from the sort of the base specifications and understanding where you are, the next thing to keep in mind is the actual loads. And I know we touched on that, and there's a lot of debates around that, but often that can be a tricky one to get right, because sometimes the actual loads for a van that can tow a lot is underspec'd, in my opinion. And I think that is a key consideration. I know it's a lot to wrap your head around, and sometimes when you're studying it, you get into this and you hear these specs, you just want to throw your hands up and say, oh, bugger this is just ridiculous. It does feel like that, I know, but I think actual loads are that just extra piece, and they're not always easy to find. They're really not, and they're very hard to, especially online, and we try our best to provide those, but they're very difficult to get, especially in a digitized form. It should be your manufacturer booklet for your vehicle, but that is something also to consider, I think, especially, just as an extra safety precaution, because it's something that won't ever be brought up, and you don't often see it. You can't visually see that. So, that's something else to consider.
Well, that's fantastic. And thanks very much for joining me today and all your valuable information. I'm sure many listeners will get a lot out of that.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. And as part of this as well, I would like to offer a coupon for anyone listening through your podcast. Is 25% off any of our paid options for the Towing Calculator. And that can mean that they can... they can purchase a premium report, which would give them all the specifications and show them all the limits. And we do also offer a subscription model, which gives you unlimited amount of uses with around 10 registration lookups a month. So it means you can use it 10 times. The reason for that is because we use a third party to look up a national governing database for that. So we have 10 restricted because we've got to pay each time, but it's actually unlimited if we just use the drop down. And if you do want to use more than 10 credits, you can purchase an unlimited amount for $2. But I'll give you the coupon for that. And thanks for having me on. It's been good.
No worries at all. And you can find that coupon in the show notes, and I will put all the links in the podcasting episode itself, or you can go to the All Around Oz website and use the calculator. If you search for towing weight calculator, the page will come up and you can use the free version, or you can find a link on the front page of All Around Oz, or the home page of All Around Oz, linking directly to that page. but I will put all that information along with the coupon code in the show notes. So thanks very much for that.
You're welcome, and I hope people get a lot of use out of that. It's not perfect. It's something that's been set up, as I mentioned, because myself and others came across the issue that so many talk about. So we've set out as a journey to build a solution for it, and we're continually improving it, sourcing more specifications, trying to get as many axle load data as we can for vehicles. So we are always trying to improve things and manage things, and we do have other things we'd like to add on to that as well. So we always welcome recommendations and comments and things to make life easier. Because I think something for us is really the key between having it simple enough that it's not overwhelming for someone to use that's new to towing, but not having it too complicated for those that may want an in-depth analysis of, let's say, axle loads and how things affect their weight, that when a new person uses it, they go,
Yep.
I don't know what in the hell is going on with this. It's too confusing. I've had enough. So getting that balance right sounds simple, but it can be quite difficult to do because you can overcomplicate things very quickly. So yeah, I do welcome any feedback and suggestions at all. So thanks very much.
Okay. Thank you, and thanks again for joining me today.
Thanks, Annette.
Thanks for tuning in to Big Lap Chats. We hope today's episode helped you take another step towards planning your lap of Australia. And if you're already on the road, we hope you picked up some great tips on where to stay and what to see and do along the way. If you found it helpful, we'd love your feedback. Head over to allaroundoz.com.au/podcast, where you can also download the show notes and find more resources to help with your journey. We'll be back next week with more tips and stories about caravanning, camping, and planning your lap of Australia. Until then, happy travels.